So big welcome to all of you, and welcome Shabana back to the stage here. That was a wonderful introduction, and I think that video in many ways represents the range of work, the very wide gamut of work that you've done, which extends beyond the screen, extends beyond the theatrical stage, really enters people's lives, and the sort of work that you've been doing for change. So has this come easily, effortlessly?
You know, it should have come easily and effortlessly given my background, given the fact that my father was a leading light of the progressive writers movement, and my mother was with progressive theater. Both of them believed that art should be used as an instrument for social change. So, and all around me, what I saw as a child was, you know, the fight for gender justice, social equality, embracing India's pluralism, all of that. But strangely, when I first came into films, I think there was so much politics discussed all around that I sort of put my fingers in and said, I don't want to have anything to do with it. And there was a period in my life when I was also not even reading the newspapers, and I was only working in films. And it is to my father's credit that he never expressed his disappointment, because obviously the kind of background that I had grown up in, it must have been surprising for him. And but I think that he was very confident that the soil is so fertile that the plant is bound to take root. And then a time came when, particularly, there were 2 or 3 films which came together, when my consciousness became more focused. And I think a time comes in an artist's life when you can no longer treat your work like a 9-to-5 job, because you're playing characters that are fighting social injustice. You're playing characters that are taking up for the cause of women. After that, it cannot become so divided that you say that, all right, I'll work from 9 to 6 and then go back to my air-conditioned comfort and forget about the people that I'm representing. Some of the residue of the parts that you're playing are bound to sort of seep into your life. And then a time came, it was, I think, in the really in the 80s, when it all fructified into a very conscious choice that this is something I have. People listen to actors, and we have the choice to use that for issues that we believe in.
That's true. But, you know, you've also lived, you were born in Hyderabad, but you've grown up and you've lived in Bombay, and you've been part of the film industry, which is also a very glamorous industry. So how did you balance this need for a public self, which had to be glamorous, life perhaps also, which had to have that element of glamour? It's supported. The industry is supported with the media, with the magazines, with everything else that you read about. I was telling Shabana, when we were young and still in school and growing up outside Calcutta, our only access to Star Lives was through magazines. And there was this new glossy magazine called Stardust with glossy photographs on top. And of course, we didn't have it at home, so I used to steal into a neighbor's house very often to furtively look through those pages, and these images came to us only through such things. But you were there, and you also had this, you know, you grew up in a commune when you were young. It was a very unusual childhood, but you were entering into this world, which was a glamorous world, a privileged world. How did you negotiate this?
Well, first, let me tell you, my entry into the glamour world was a disaster, okay? Because I wasn't made for it at all. And there's a very interesting story that when I first went to meet Shyam Benegal, he wanted to meet me for Ankur. And I went in a sari, in the way I used to dress, with a big bindi, and he had one look at me, and something clicked, and he felt all right. Although I was much younger than the character Lakshmi I was to play, he felt that there was something about this person that I can cast her. And so then he said, do you have any photographs of yours? And I proudly took on these photographs, in which I'd worn a hat and I was doing. And he quickly put them inside and he said, okay, we'll get some more photographs taken, forget about this. So I tried to sort of to fit in. I tried to fit in and I failed miserably. But I was very fortunate because a lot of films that I was doing were commercially very successful in spite of me, not because of me, but I rode on that. And then I realized that because of my exposure to the Film Institute, where I happened to see the best in European cinema, Japanese cinema, Swedish cinema, which you
hadn't seen before.
No, obviously not, because that was a time in Mumbai when you couldn't watch these films. So my aesthetics were shaped by that. I think the fact that I started my career with Shyam Benegal also had a very big role to play in that, because you must realize that the parallel cinema movement started literally with Ankur. So a lot of stories were being written and these films were being made, and I was lucky to be at the right place at the right time. But you know, when films like Parvarish and films like Amar Akbar Anthony became huge successes, the criticism that I faced was, it's okay that Neetu Singh and Parveen Babi are in it, but what was Shabana Azmi doing in it? And so then I realized that no, it's not enough for me to be part of a film that's going to be very successful. There is a certain expectation from the kind of work I do. And then I sort of shifted a little bit more into what is called the middle of road cinema. And if you look at the middle 80s, then you have Masoom and you have Arth and you have Avatar and all these films where the slot fitted better. And then I gravitated towards that. And then I obviously made a conscious choice that I would not be part of a regressive film, because Hindi cinema was full of very many women-centric films, but they were all woman in the stereotype. So the all-forgiving mother, the sacrificing wife, the forgiving sister, all this, you know. And then you realize that, no, you had to push that boundary. And that I made a conscious choice.
Right. So the sort of cinema that you inherited, the big cinema, as you said, and you've mentioned films like Main Chup Rahungi, where the woman says, I'm silent. That's supposed to be silence is her virtue, or sacrifice is her virtue. I think, as you said, you were there in the right place at the right time, because it was also the time for the Indian women's movement. And that was gaining momentum through the 70s, certainly became much bigger in the 80s. And that the time that we grew up and the time that we saw your films and why they were so seminal, why they were so influential, was also because of the times within which we grew up, because the issue of women's emancipation, the women gender rights, the whole battle about actually quantifying women's work at home. Domestic work was never considered in the economic grid. It didn't even enter it. It entered only in the early 90s or mid 90s, when we were having these debates where you had to quantify women's work at home. What is domestic work? Is it invisible? Is it something that you don't count in? And that's the sort of time when we looked at films like Arth. And a little earlier, when we were growing up, of course, in a leftist university at Jaipur, subaltern studies in academia was so big at that time. And we were made to recognize about a world around us which was less privileged and where there was a movement happening. There were stirrings happening. This is pretty much post-independence. There's a lot of disillusionment which had happened at various levels. And it is at that time that your film, Ankur, came in. So as a very sophisticated Bombayite, how did you connect with the character of Lakshmi?
Oh, it was really totally to Shyam Benegal's credit, because I had never been in a village in my life. And when I went, so what Shyam Benegal, you know, a lot of me, I don't know if, have you seen Ankur? Has anybody seen Ankur? Okay, so a few people have seen it. So I play a farmhand in it, and a lot of it was about me sitting on my haunches. And I couldn't do it, being the urban Mumbai girl that I was. And so Shyam Benegal said, this won't do, because a lot of this has to do with you sitting and cooking and doing things like that. So you cannot sit at the dining table with us. You must sit in a corner and you must sit on your haunches, and please learn how to do this. So about 1 week into this, some young boys from the college came, and they looked at me sitting in this corner in this whole fancy table where everybody else was sitting. So they looked at me and they said, where is the heroine of the film? So I said, she's not needed today. She hasn't come. So they said, so what do you play? I said, I play the servant girl. Okay, and they went to And this Shyam Benegal was watching. And then he called me and embraced me and he said, you've succeeded
Now you're ready.
in this thing. Now you are.
Now
You're welcome to come and sit with us. So it was really Shyam Benegal who sort of put me in those clothes, made me walk around. The village women used to make fun of me because, I couldn't get that pounding of the thing, and they used to find me very funny, etc., etc. But there was something happening which I wasn't very aware of, but I remember writing to my mother and saying, this seems to be like a Satyajit Ray film. So she said, look at your eyebrows. How can it ever be a Satyajit Ray film? Because in those days I used to pluck my
pencil eyebrows.
Eyebrows, yes.
That's very true.
My mother's one for never mincing her words, let me tell you that.
Yeah, she's been a great critic, but also so proud of all your work. Immense.
You see, she's very interesting. Firstly, she is a great actor. Javed is sitting here and doesn't mince words in saying that when Shaukat and Shabana are on stage, Shaukat just eats her alive, chews her and throws her out because she is a great theatre actress. But when she first saw Ankur, well, it was in a private viewing, and she turned around. We were about 50 of us, and she turned around. She was in the first row. She turned around. I was at the back, and she said, "You're a very good actress, and I'm very proud of you. That's really good work." And my ears went red. I said, "Oh my God, there are other people watching." 1.5 months later, she saw a film called Fasla, K. Abbas's film, and she turned around and said, "You are dreadful, and this film is very dreadful. And had I seen this film, I would have said, please leave the film industry, there's no chance for you." So that kind of forthright criticism I'm used to getting from my mother.
But also your memories, your earlier memories of being carried on stage or at least carried into rehearsals with your mother, because as you said, you lived in this commune, there was no money to keep a maid or a nanny for you, so you accompanied your mother to your rehearsals and tours. That must have also given you a sense of stage lights, performance.
Yes, of course. But I think apart from that, I think when I look back upon it, I just think that Prithviraj Kapoor was such a special man. At that time, he realized how important it was for working mothers to have a kind of creche where they can bring their children. I mean, it was unthinkable. You could never imagine that in the film world, you could carry your child. Once your child is there, it's supposed to just disappear into thin air because you're not supposed to be a working woman and be caring about the child. He did that, because of which I was actually strapped on mum's back, and I used to be taken to the rehearsals and then go to sleep in the green room. And sometimes in group scenes, I was also taken up on stage and just made to run around and things like that. So it became for me a very natural way of being. But equally, see, when my mother was a working woman, and whenever she could take me, she would take me. But on the other hand, my father, who was earning far less money than her because all the money used to go to the Communist Party, he would then look after us. And he would dress us up. And he would, because we couldn't afford a maid. And then in Mushairas, we would be taken, and on this huge stage, we would go to sleep behind these huge bolsters. And then when we would hear this thundering applause, we would know, all right, Abba has come. And so then we'd just peep out and go back to sleep. So in my mind, between man and woman, there was no clear division about how this is a woman's space and this is a man's responsibility. I must have been about 19 years old when I realized that what I take as a given is actually an exception, and not the rule.
Yeah, very much so. In fact, you were quite privileged to be surrounded by progressive thinking people, because it was not just your parents, but your surrogate parents,
the whole lot
the
of
writers
them, yes.
and the actors with whom
you
grew up and shared space with. Coming back to Ankur, as many of you said, you've seen the film, and most of you know that we have these big moments of cinema in cinema history. And the last scene of Ankur, where Lakshmi protests, she actually shouts out her protest, stood not just for that one woman on screen, but stood for much more, stood for the rural protest, and the protest came through the voice of a woman. So it became a very key scene to talk about, it became a text to talk about, and it became part of our histories. And it was that scene which also prompted Satyajit Ray to write that you were one of the most dramatic, or the most dramatic actress of the times. Given Ankur and the space within which it was made and the history, the historical times within which it was inserted, not too long after you have another equally important film, which is Arth, Mahesh Bhatt's Arth. And Arth is in so many ways evokes Ibsen's Nora, The Doll's House. It evokes Rabindranath's Strid Patro, or The Wife's Letter, and this very gesture of moving out of a marital home, where a woman leaves her home and stays separately, or somebody who can really turn away a philandering husband at the end when the husband comes back and says, "Will you take me back?" And she counter questions and says, "Had I done this, had I betrayed you, would you take me back?" Again, a historical moment, and these, as I'm saying, are not just representative of the Lakshmi or the puja, but a question which is being asked by a growing generation and a growing consciousness among women. Arth, you've talked about this many times, changed your perception of your public role or your public responsibility.
Yes, it was the beginning of my involvement with the women's movement, because I was merely an actor doing a part. And suddenly, after the film was released to much acclaim and commercial success, I had hordes of women come into my house, not as fans to star, but in sisterhood, expecting me to resolve all their marital conflicts. And I was merely an actor, and I was really frightened. I was also very young. But it also brought into focus for me the fact that oftentimes the audience cannot distinguish between the character and the actor, and that this is a huge privilege that we have as artists, and given my kind of background. That was the beginning of my involvement with the women's movement. It was much later then that how patriarchy touches everything that we do, whether it is men or women. Both of them are as much victims of patriarchy. And that is the space from which women have to break free. Now, you see, the very scary thing about patriarchy is that it gets invested in people in a way where women also start believing that, all right, this is something that is okay to happen with me. And of course, boys are privileged from birth just for the accident of being born male. And then that is constantly perpetuated. And it is perpetuated how? How are we going to get rid of this? Now, if you see the way society is framed, for all our talk of equality and all that, actually it's the powerful who decide the rules of the game. And then the powerless then follow. And then a time comes when obviously you start fighting it and you say, this is no longer acceptable. I think the time has come for women finally to set themselves free and say, we want to free ourselves from patriarchy. We are not going to take it. How it works also is that the powerful make all the rules, then they give it a religious color, and so it is religion that decides for you what you have to do. It is your sense of responsibility. This is the kind of thing you do. And the very interesting thing is that if you look at Indian society, mythology plays a very big part in the way we conceive our heroes and our heroines. So Ram as the hero who has a sense of duty above his personal responsibility, and Sita as the quietly acquiescing wife, giving in to whatever her husband's saying, become the role models of who a hero and who a heroine are. Now, filmmakers, instead of reflecting the reality of women, where women are, they want to play safe by putting them in these roles. But happily, the time has come today when that mold has been broken, and what is very important, it's being broken in the mainstream cinema. And you are also having films. I mean, it's a very recent example, but you've got Razi, you've got Veere the Wedding, you've got so many films done by Vidya Balan, where these are women-centric films, not with women in traditional roles, but women who are breaking free, and it's being accepted by the public.
Yeah, it's a more real language. So when we had that bifurcation between cinema as entertainment and cinema as parallel cinema or alternate cinema, the language of cinema was also different. Javed Saab's here. The language of big cinema, the rhetoric of big cinema, and the reality, the real tones, which is what we valued in the work that you did, because it gave you that palpable proximity to real people. And I'm sure you must have engaged in that yourself when you approached these roles or negotiated these roles. But coming to what's happening now, I think, as you said, it's the diversity of roles that are available to younger people. The other day I was watching an interview by Alia Bhatt's mother, who says the industry is ready for her. In her times or in your times, at least this is what her mother was saying, that we felt that the industry wasn't ready for us or the sort of work that we wanted to do. So that was a very interesting transition when you and Smita Patil and later Dipti and the rest of them came in. Bengali cinema had a lot to do with that. Malayali cinema had a lot to do with that. The sort of changes and explorations that were happening. But today it's happening in mainstream cinema. It's happening in the Bombay cinema or Bollywood cinema. So younger people have access to much more of diversity. I think there's another film which is, again, so important in your life, and that's the decision to work in Deepa Mehta's Fire, a film which in many ways iconized you in a much larger way and in a global way. What made you say yes to that role of Radha?
You know, when I read the script, I liked it, and I felt that she would be able to do justice to it in a way which wouldn't be vicarious, and that she would be able to do it sensitively. But I did take some time to say yes, because I also work in the slums, and at that time I felt that the film would be used against me in the work that I was doing in the slums, etc. So I weighed all the options, and then I did it because I felt that that India is not a monolith. Not everybody would react in the same way. And that's what happened. When the film was released, a lot of people were very overwhelmed by it. Some were angry, some were dismayed, some were shocked. But a process of questioning started. And I think that's all that art can do. I keep saying that art has the possibility of creating a climate of sensitivity in which it is possible for change to occur. It doesn't directly, you don't directly watch a film and then change overnight, unless there are also other things that are happening. But it became a cult film, really. It did become a cult film.
So in terms of cultural studies, you know, when we're looking at films as texts, it is cultural studies, and literature or theatre or a play or a film can in many ways become a crucial point of change. As you said, not immediate change, but it can set people thinking. And Fire came at a point where, after we'd had these debates about women and domestic work, after we had had debates about women and work perhaps, there was also this debate about women and sexuality. So this entire awareness and a public engagement with the issue of gender and sexuality was possible, was facilitated in many ways by a film like Fire. But with Fire also came the sense and a very frightening foreboding of a moral brigade or a moral censorship, and the sort of vandalization that happened in the theatres when the film was released. Were you prepared for something like that?
No, not to the extent that it was, because the film was really running quite peacefully for 3 weeks, till the Shiv Sena decided that they could get political mileage out of it, and then they protested, pulled the film out of the theatre, vandalized the seats, etc. But to the credit of the Board of Film Certification, you see, Information Ministry, instead of taking a stand and saying that this has been passed by the Central Board of Film Certification, it needs no further certification, sent it back in their wisdom. And I must say, to the credit of the CBFC, they sent it back without any cuts in it at all. So that was a very, very bold step that was taken.
And it sort of reinforced your belief and trust in public opinion?
Yes, of course. And but this whole thing of censorship is something that I disagree with. And there is a lot of discussion around that at the moment. And what we've said, it's always been called the censor board. Firstly, it's not the censor board. It's not its business to censor. It's business to classify films or to certify films, right? So first we have to get that when you put people in this situation, they're not there to cut. They're there to actually just classify the films. Now, what I find faulty in the model that we have followed, which is the British model, really, is that the ruling dispensation of the day chooses the person who's the chairperson, and then you take about 30 people from this vast country, and they sit on the censor board. They are supposed to be autonomous, but they are chosen because they have a particular political dispensation. Then 5 years later, another government comes and that happens. So what you're doing is you are telling me that the morality of my country is being determined every 5 years by the political dispensation of the day. And that's completely unacceptable. I mean, how can you sit and tell me this should not go? I mean, as an artist, surely. Now, the American model is a far more interesting model because they take people from within the film industry and they sit with the filmmaker and they say, all right, we're talking only about classifying. So you decide that, do you want your film to be seen by children? In which case, you will have to put in some cuts that you will decide for yourself. Or if you don't want even a frame cut from it, you'll get a XXX certificate. So it is being done in a way where you're encouraging responsibility. And I do think that art is about freedom, but there is also responsibility.
Yes. And the responsibility in your work, as you said, art triggered a lot of that. But there's been so much work that you've done outside the sphere of cinema. I'd love to talk about your theatre work as well. But apart from that, or beyond that, there's work that you have done engaging with real life. And you've engaged with, I remember again, when we were much younger, we saw Mile Sur Hamara Tumhara, which was a sort of anthem, again celebrating India's diversity, pluralism, and you were part of it. You also were one of the first to bring in the public message of AIDS awareness through television. Television was potent then, and you also played a part in a television drama. You worked for slum rehabilitation, and I don't know whether many people here know about it, with an organization called Nivara Haq. You've actively engaged with the right for slum dwellers for housing, the housing rights. And if I remember, the first time I met you was when you were out on one of these campaigns on the street and you were arrested by the police and you were in Kolaba police station. And the same evening you were about to perform Tumhari Amrita at NCPA, and we all had our tickets to the show. And I'd just come back from my classes at St. Xavier's, and in the afternoon, Bhavna calls me and says, Shabana's then Kolaba police station. So I went there, and of course, everyone was there, the director and Farooq and Javed Saab came later to offer bail. And very, very, very disturbed, Shabana was sitting there, and nobody knew whether she'd really be, we weren't even thinking, is this play going to happen?
No, let me refresh your memory. What happened is that my mother and my father and Javed arrived, apart from, and listen to Javed's reaction, okay? He was at a recording, and he was given this phone call, Shabana's been arrested. He said, okay. And then he continued with the recording, and then after 15 minutes, told his music director, my wife has been arrested, I will have to go. And they fainted and they said, what are you sitting here? So that's how he came, by the way. Then after that, they said, you take bail and you can go. I said, I refuse to take bail. I haven't done anything wrong. And along with me, there were 16 other slum dwellers who had been arrested. We were charged with creating a riot. We had actually gone and we were stopping the riot. Now, what happened is my mother came and she's telling the police people, you know, I'm not arguing that she's wrong or she's right. I'm not arguing. I'm only saying that we are artists and the show must go on. So please allow me to take her. She will go and perform for 2 hours. I will bring her back and then you can put her in jail. Okay, now publicly I am going to say something which is a real confession. You're the first people I'm telling that about. Now what was happening is that when the police were arresting us, we were refusing to be arrested. So the women police constables came and they picked me up, and there were 2 people who were dragging me. And I thought, wow, this is going to make a really nice picture. So I looked really uncomfortable and realized that my shalwar had come down. And so from doing, I said, Didi, I'm calling the policewoman, Didi, meri shalwar nikal rahi hai, main baanu. So she gets up, they make a little thing, I tie my shalwar and then go back. Once an actress, always an actor. Now I've confessed it.
Yeah, but to continue that story, in a couple of hours you were there at NCPA performing Tumhari Amrita, and for me at least, again, it was a great moment of reckoning to see an actress and the professional strength that you bring with your training and your discipline to be able to do that. Just turning to your theatre, is there a favorite amongst your stage work?
I haven't done all that much theatre. I enjoy
But
theatre.
they've become quite legendary. Tumhari Amrita is legendary. Kaifi Aur
Because of
Main
the
has
script.
gained
Honestly, it is
reputation.
because of the script. Because they're extremely well-written things. But I think for an actor to be able to do both theatre and film is really important. Because they are the same and yet they're different. I mean, the how you find a character is more or less the same. You get more time in theatre, you get less time in film. So you inhabit the world of another person, but the whole thing about theatre is every single day you have to be, you know, always I say that the butterflies in my stomach become like elephants just before I go on stage, and that pays off. And if I become complacent and I say, all right, I've done 8 shows in a day, boy, do I go wrong. So that you do not have the comfort of a second take. But film is much more a director's medium, and it's also a very collaborative medium. It's dependent on lots of things, the camera, the editing, the writing, of course, being the base, your co-stars, etc. Theatre in that way is the actor's medium, because once you go up on stage, you could have given me any number of instructions. I decide to ignore them and do my own thing. So I think both these disciplines are very important.
And you know, in the larger sphere of the industry, this year's been quite momentous, at least with Hollywood and globally, with some very terrible people who've been brought down, and a lot of women who've come up talking about their stories, and I Am and the other social media movements have become so potent. Did you ever feel this when you were in the industry in India or elsewhere, the sense of male power, the sense of male hegemony?
Of course you were aware of that, but I personally wasn't subjected to that. I was always considered a queer kettle of fish. You know, I was Kaifi Azmi's daughter and belonged to this Lal Jhanda kind of person. I was treated separately. But that doesn't mean that I wasn't aware that it was around. It was spoken not loudly, because it was considered very risky to do so. But it doesn't happen only to women in the film industry. It happens to women everywhere in the world. And yesterday when I was at the feminist seminar, it was very interesting that the one statement that I take back with me from that is the Me Too movement happens because it is the failure of the law to take redressal action. And to me, that is it. If women had the faith that they would be able to talk about it and get justice by law, many, many more women would speak. But if you look at the way, particularly with the rape laws, what happens is all along we have been blaming the victim rather than the perpetrator. And so when the Nirbhaya gang rape happened, I think there was a very important shift because, you know, they said shift the blame, shift the shame. And women and boys and girls came out on the streets, and this shouldn't happen. Now, then, of course, the Jagdish Verma Commission was put in, not Jagdish Verma.
The Verma Commission.
Yeah. And a protocol was established as how the questioning would happen. Because, you see, the way women, the kind of questioning the women would be subjected to by the police or in the courts would be like getting a verbal rape, you know, because it was always suggested that you were out in the streets in the night, you were the one who was wearing a clinging neckline, you invited, you didn't act modest enough. All these things, that was, now that is definitely changing. The laws at the moment in India say that when the police ask you questions, they have to videotape the whole thing. So they cannot sort of start putting the blame on you. But again, we are dealing with a patriarchal mindset. It cannot change overnight. But the fact that women are coming forward, the fact that they're talking about it, also the fact that it seems very, very disturbing because we see that we hear about rapes every single day. But maybe that's also a way of saying that, all right, women are actually talking about it. We have a long way to go. We have to have a very long way to go. But I think that we are stepping in the right direction. Are we done for time?
No, we've just got a little time, so
we can ask questions.
Yes, just end with the last question, Shabana, before I take your question. Again, as many of you know, that Shabana was nominated as an upper house member, Rajya Sabha member, and so you've had these years of really engaging with the larger politics of the country. What did you bring into that? Also, you've never really actively been part of the Communist Party, like your father. You've never been part of any party?
No, I've never been part of any political party because I believe that joining a political party is putting the fetters on because the party's truth becomes your truth, which is definitely a subjective truth. I was very fortunate because I was nominated by the president and I had the freedom to speak on any subject that I wanted. And the chair was very kind to me. So I spoke about things which were not generally considered political things, but with the domestic violence bill, with the rehabilitation bill for slum dwellers, there was lots of very active participation in that. So I used that position.
And you've been actively engaged now with Mijwa, your NGO, on one hand extending your father's legacy, but also actively doing so much for women's education and training.
Well, the thing again is when I'm working in Mijwa, I realize more and more, you know, because I'm constantly thinking of how do we break the stranglehold of patriarchy. And I think that one of the reasons it also happens is right from the time our children are born, we decide for them, this is what a boy is supposed to do and this is what a girl is supposed to do. And I think we have to break that. We have to break it. We have to make the boy give up his sense of privilege and we have to treat our children equally. Now, in Mijwa, it wouldn't have happened directly, but it happened because, of course, we are going through education, etc. But on the other hand, we are giving these women skills and employment. And that skill and that employment is now changing their view of the world because suddenly they're earning a lot of money and in relative terms, of course. but they are becoming part of the decision-making process of the house. You know, so from being regarded as liabilities, they are now being regarded as assets. So these women now are making sure that their daughters get what they didn't give. And to me, that is important. Yeah.
Do we have a mic for them?
I wanted to ask Shabana ji if you could talk a little about the various films over the years where you've had to sing for your roles, Anjuman, Morning Raga, and Sonata, and taking off from the last film about your experiences with working with several women directors over the years, Gurinder Chadha, Meera Nair, Deepa Mehta, and Aparna Sen. So is there something, do you think a woman director brings something different to a table and the dynamic on set?
Well, I hope that she does. You know, I hope that she does. Because I think it's very important for the female gaze, I'm not saying the feminist gaze, I'm saying the female gaze, to be included in the arts. Because for far too long it has been dominated by the male gaze. And so with all these women directors, I've worked with a lot of them, there is a certain degree of comfort that I feel because of their gaze. I'm not at all suggesting that they have to choose only feminist stories. They can make any stories, they can make spy thrillers, they can do anything, but that gaze should be different. But I don't think that that gaze is only women. Because Shyam Benegal has a female gaze, Roland Joffe has a female gaze, John Schlesinger has a female gaze. I think, in fact, a true artist becomes one when the yin and the yang is perfectly balanced, you know, when both the man and the woman are in it. For artistic expression, I think that's really important. As far as singing is concerned, it's been a nightmare. It's been a nightmare. I am not a trained singer, and I've just been bullied into it, and Sonata being really... I was bullied into Anjuman because Muzaffar Ali kept telling me, but it can't be a trained singer. You see, the women in those times, Tehtul Lafz is when you just recite and you sing in Tarannum. So if it is Lataji or Asha, it won't seem correct, so you do it. So anyway, he bullied me. I did that. Then after that, Morning Raga was a nightmare, but it was... SARS also. But the latest one is Sonata.
And it was note perfect.
But you're a Bengali?
Yes, I am.
I was so terrified of the Bengalis. I said, "Meri jaan kha jayenge." But anyway, Aparna Sen just wouldn't take no. And now what is very interesting is that it came on YouTube or something, and so a lot of people saw it, and a lot of them were appreciative. But there were some Bengalis who said, "Hobe na, impossible, can't be." Shabana Azmi with money can do anything. You know, she's trying to pass off a classical, trained singer who does Rabindra Sangeet. Uski आवाज करके.
The character is not a trained singer. She's just an investment banker.
No, but the thing is that they are saying that a trained singer has done this, and Shabana Azmi is passing it off. So I said, now this is a big compliment. And you know what is interesting is on the day that I was doing the shooting, Sangeeta was there, and so she'll tell you that I've sung it. Yeah, please.
There's a question there.
Hi, Shabana. So I have a question for you as a woman, and as well as, you know, you are representing the Rajya Sabha, as well as, you know, you've done a lot for the movement. I mean, we always talk about men being a part of this patriarchal society, which is totally true. But at the same time, I mean, just around me, I see women who are educated. But a big part of, like, I can take example of my grandmother, who back in the days had a BA degree, but she is the most patriarchal person, you know, possible. You know, so for example, I personally mentioned to her about an incident which happened to me as a child, and she said, "Oh, but you have so many boyfriends, it's the same thing." So how, as a, you know, woman and a Rajya Sabha member, how do we change the women's mindset? Because it's enough talking about men, but we women are also responsible for putting others down.
But I've said that always. I say that women are as much victims of patriarchy, and then they internalize it, and then it carries on. Most certainly, it affects both men. Sorry?
As mothers, they have a responsibility towards making the woman, their daughters, empowered, and they don't do that.
No, they don't do that in situations where they do not realize what that power actually means. And that's why the example that I gave you of Mijwa is only one of many, where when you become part of the decision-making process, then you realize, oh my God, this power is there. So you have to realize that it's done in a way, it's usually, you see, it's very easy, and I'm very tired of people saying that women are women's worst enemies.
Yeah.
You know, no, but that's not true. The fact is that you have to see the cycle in which they have been caught. Women have not been given power from the time they were born, and then finally a time comes maybe when she's a mother-in-law and she can finally put some power on the daughter-in-law, and she abuses it. But if she has power right from the word go, she would not need to do it. So I'm not making a case that women should be forgiven, but what I am saying is, if from our childhood we are brought up in a way that both male and female are to have not separate roles to play, but like partners together, it will change. Hopefully not. Hopefully not. I see, the fact that you're so angry about it to me is very good, because then obviously you're going to talk to your friends about it, and your friends are going to do that. And I think definitely the time has come when young girls are completely clear that they are not going to compromise in a relationship with a man. But I think it's also going the other way around, because you're also sort of now wanting to legislate equality. Like, if I have ironed your trouser, you better iron my shirt, otherwise you're not equal. It doesn't go that way. Yeah.
We take this question first.
In terms of your political interests, all of South Asia seems to have gone towards the right. You have people like Imran Khan and the revelations by his ex-wife about what it was like being married to him. And in India, you've got an increasingly right-wing government.
You know, I don't think it's only India. I don't think it's only Southeast Asia. I think it's the world over. Look at what is happening here. Look at what is happening in America. The world is definitely, it seems like it is turning and going the other way. They're going right-wing. But I always feel that these are cycles that happen. And now, matlab, pani had se guzar gaya hai. And what will happen is it's going so extreme right that there is going to be a backlash. And I see that more and more in India. I find that really quite heartening, because I feel that when you are suppressed, that's when art comes out against that suppression. When you're suppressed, then people feel the need to say, listen, we've got to do something about it. When it seems sort of okay, average, then people don't feel propelled to take action. And I find comfort in the fact that as much suppression as there is all over the world, it's definitely going right-wing. There's also a very strong force that is absolutely fighting it. And then therein I find hope.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But also I think the need to keep the debate open and the conversation open about what you believe in terms of your nation or your identity and the plurality of our society.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really important to keep that ongoing.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, we have a question here as well.
Hi, very interesting exchange. I've really enjoyed it. My question is India at a crossroad, or is it still tribal? I say this for various reasons, which I pick up from the exchange that you had. The political dispensation and the sort of tension with censor boards can be replicated in other areas, particularly the judiciary. The work that the very noble work that you do in upper house is not replicated in the lower house, where there is
If you'll make your question more
huge amounts of
targeted.
corruption. So is India at a crossroad, or is it still tribal in nature?
Is it
Tribal in nature.
tribal in nature?
Is it at the crossroads?
No, I think it is at the crossroads, because it really is about whether the glass is half full or it is half empty. And I think that in India and in its democracy, what really is of importance is the vote. Whom does the vote go to? And the vote went a particular way last time. You can already see the rumblings. You can see that this is not led to a sense of satisfaction at all. So let's see what happens in the next elections. But one thing that I'm finding very interesting in India is it seems almost as if the hegemony of the big party, of a centrist bloc, seems to be disappearing. Regional aspirations are gaining in strength. They are getting a foot in the door, and they are getting a chance to say that this is what we want, which in a democracy I think is very important. What about the judiciary?
You know better than anyone else the tangles and the outbursts and the corruption.
Mushkil hai. Mushkil. Javed sir, would you like to answer that question, please, on my behalf? Please do it. Come to my rescue. Come. Give him the mic.
Well, I think there have been, you should see it from this point of view, that there have been certain judges who protested and gave a very strong public statement, and then there was reaction in public. So it means the judiciary is not totally subjugated. I think at any point in time, the executive must be trying and would try anywhere in the world to influence the judiciary and make them see things from their point of view. But this attempt is not successful. I mean, there was a center party that is in power in center, wanted 15 days for
They said no.
claiming their majority in the House, but the Supreme Court said no, 2 days are good enough. So now and again you see the judiciary is giving decisions which are not very comforting or convenient for
To the executive.
the powers that be. So to paint judiciary that, oh, now the judiciary is taken over by some other people is not right.
Yeah, that's my
Lots
question.
of questions.
Yes.
Much like the last scene in Ankur, there are several films of yours where there are iconic moments. There is one in Mrityu Dand at the end when you alight from the carriage and you speak to Mohan Agashe. Up until that point in the movie, you've been described, as you yourself say in your dialogue, as quote-unquote barren. I apologize for using this word. And then in one sentence it changes. About 10 years before that, there was another movie called Rihai with Vinod Khanna and Hema Malini, in which he's an urban migrant worker, comes back, discovers Hema Malini is pregnant from Nasiruddin Shah, who was in the thing. My question to you is, why have such characters? In Rihai, Vinod Khanna says that I'm like Vishnu. I stand up, I take in the poison, and yet I can keep standing as a man. The example you gave about Ram, why is it that such appeals to mythology, which show men as being strong men supporting women, why have those not been as popular?
That's a very interesting question, but I do think that it is changing. And men supporting women have been there for the longest time. I mean, I worked in a film called Swami, and I behaved rather badly in that film with my husband. And look at how he wins my affection by being there for me. So I think there are instances, but today, definitely it is changing, and therein I draw comfort. But that's a very important question.
Should we take this here?
Can we have some girls?
Yeah, here's the lady trying to.
Yes, young girl.
Come on, get up. Again, shall we club some questions because we'll run out of
I
time?
was just wondering about, you talking about patriarchy. As a legislator, do you think it would be possible in India to stop having to prove
To be twice as good, to be half as well.
No, no, but wherever you go to fill in a form in the government, you're asked your name and then your father's name. And my attitude is, why do you want to know my father's name? It's my mother's name you should ask for, because that's the only one you can prove.
That's right.
Okay. There's a question here.
You know, I think
we just take
examples
some
of
of
this
these
kind are
words?
really important, because on individual level, if we start doing that, then the change will happen. These are not to be seen as insignificant considerations. It's really raising
Yeah,
these
and another
questions
one
which
here.
are changing
Can we take
the debate.
the lady here, please?
Welcome to London when we are experiencing an Indian summer. I loved you in Next of Kin as the mother of a potential terrorist. I think we need to see more Bollywood movies around the family. My question to you is about, you said that artists have a responsibility. We've had Farhan Akhtar doing Dil Chahta Hai, where he demonstrated male bonding, male friendship, etc. And we were expecting a lot from Viet the Wedding, which we thought would demonstrate female friendship, female bonding, and portray a lot more messages around what you've been talking about today, which is feminism being used, to empower women. In this current climate in India, where rape is happening every day, to show 4 girls who throughout the movie are swearing, smoking, drinking, sleeping around with random men. Is this the message we want to send out to those men who think Indian women are easy prey?
You know, I think it's a very important question. Don't sigh. I will give you the answer for it. It's a very important question, because this question is raised constantly as a way of constantly controlling women's sexuality. It's constantly used. See, it is the same argument that says you went out in the dark of night, you were wearing a clinging dress. To try and suppress and control the woman's movement, movement in society, these are considerations. I know that you're not putting it, you're genuinely concerned about this. The whole point is that women talking about their sexuality, being able to smoke, drink, none of them should make them easy prey to men. Because, we say that even sex workers have a right to say, no, I don't want to sleep with you right now. So I think that's a dangerous path to go in. I respect your concern, but I think we have to fight that and say, that is not the reason men are raping women. It's got nothing to do with women. It's got to do with power, and it's got to do with considering women easy prey and the lack of fear that they will get punished. That is the important.
That's it? One more? Okay. I'm afraid we've run out of time, and I know lots of you had questions. Maybe you could continue speaking outside, but we'll have to bring this session to a close. I'd like to let people know here that amongst the many laurels that Shabana has on her, the one very recent one is the nomination for global leadership for women in public service. So that's a big hand for her. Thank you. And for my friends in London here, can I remind you that my film Bird of Dust